The first sound I heard wasn't my phone ringing. It was metal screaming. Not the normal kind either. Not a gate swinging shut or somebody dropping tools in a driveway. This was sharp, violent wrong. The kind of sound that makes every nerve in your body sit up before your brain even catches up. Then my phone lit up. My sister Rachel's name flashed across the screen at 6:12 in the morning. And the second I answered, I knew whatever was happening back home had officially crossed a line nobody could uncross. Rachel didn't say a word. She just flipped the camera around. There, standing in my driveway, wearing a faded pink bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, was a woman swinging bolt cutters at the security chain attached to my government-issued SUV. Not a prank. Not a misunderstanding. Not somebody stealing a car. The president of our homeowners association. And somehow that wasn't even the craziest part. The craziest part was that she looked completely convinced she was a good guy. Now, before all this happened, if you'd asked me what I thought about HOAs, I would have given you the same answer most Americans give. Annoying. Maybe a little nosy. A lot of emails about grass. A weird obsession with mailbox paint colors. Nothing serious. Certainly not something capable of turning into a federal investigation. My name is Ethan Mercer. At the time, I worked long overseas assignments for a federal security contractor. The job took me all over the world. Some weeks I slept in hotels. Some weeks I slept in places where hearing gunfire at night wasn't unusual. You learn pretty quickly how to compartmentalize your life. Work goes in one box. Home goes in another. Or at least that's what I thought. Back home, I owned one thing that mattered more than anything else. My grandmother's house. A modest 3-bedroom place in a neighborhood called Cedar Ridge, tucked into the edge of a small town outside Nashville. The floors creaked. The porch leaned slightly to one side. The kitchen always smelled faintly like cinnamon, even when nobody had baked anything in months. My grandmother, Margaret, raised my sister and me after our parents died when we were kids. Every important memory I had lived somewhere inside those walls. When I accepted my overseas assignment, Rachel moved into the house to keep an eye on it. Simple arrangement. She worked remotely. I paid the mortgage. Everybody won. At least that's how it was supposed to go. About 3 weeks after I left the country, I received an email. Subject line, notice of community violation. I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened it and immediately laughed. Unauthorized vehicle. The violation referred to my SUV. The SUV was legally registered, parked in my own driveway, and issued through my employer. I figured somebody had made a mistake. Rachel thought the same thing. So she gathered the paperwork, printed copies of my deployment documents, and walked over to the Cedar Ridge HOA office. That was where she met Denise Holloway, the woman with the bathrobe, the bolt cutters, and apparently an unlimited appetite for control. Rachel told me later Denise barely glanced at the paperwork, didn't read it, didn't inspect it, didn't ask questions. She just leaned back in her chair and sighed dramatically like the act of existing was exhausting. Then she said something that stuck with me for months. If your brother believes he's above community standards, maybe your family should reconsider living here. Not if. Not perhaps. Now let's clear this up. She had already decided she was right. Rachel tried explaining. Denise interrupted. Rachel showed documents. Denise waved them away. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes. But when Rachel came home, she had that look people get when they realize they're dealing with someone unreasonable. Not angry. Not yet. Just confused. Like she'd accidentally stepped into a conversation everyone else understood except her. Over the next month, the violation notices kept coming. Unauthorized vehicle. Visual disruption. Neighborhood appearance concerns. And my personal favorite, negative community influence. To this day, I still have no idea what a negative community influence is supposed to mean when applied to a parked SUV. The thing barely moved. Meanwhile, Rachel started noticing Denise everywhere. Walking the neighborhood with a clipboard. Peering into driveways. Stopping in front of houses. Taking photos. Making notes. Always watching. Always measuring something. And after a while, a pattern started emerging. The houses Denise seemed most interested in belonged to military families, law enforcement officers, government employees, people who spent long stretches away from home, people whose spouses or relatives were left behind to deal with everything. One afternoon, Denise cornered Rachel near our mailbox. Rachel told me Denise had walked across the street so fast she was practically out of breath when she arrived. Rules are rules, Denise said. Rachel crossed her arms. No, rules are written down. What you're doing is making them up. For the first time, Denise smiled. Not warmly, not politely, the kind of smile that feels like a warning. And right then, neither of us knew it yet, but that conversation was about to start a war neither side would forget. The strange thing about people who abuse power is that they rarely start with something big. They start with things small enough to sound reasonable. A warning, a fine, a complaint, something that lets everyone else tell themselves they're probably overreacting. That's exactly how Denise operated. Every time Rachel pushed back, another violation notice appeared. Every time she provided proof, the rules somehow changed. At first it was annoying, then it became exhausting, and eventually it became something else entirely. About 2 weeks after the mailbox confrontation, Rachel called me late one night. I was sitting in a temporary operations office nearly 6,000 miles away. The connection was terrible. The video kept freezing, but I could immediately tell something was wrong. "Look at this," she said. She turned her laptop toward the camera. A security video was playing. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Dark driveway, parked SUV, nothing unusual. Then a flashlight beam swept across the screen. A person entered frame. My stomach tightened. Denise. She wasn't standing on the sidewalk. She wasn't near the street. She was halfway on my driveway, walking around the vehicle, looking inside, trying the door handles. I watched her circle the SUV twice before disappearing into the darkness. For several seconds, neither Rachel nor I said anything. Then she rewound the footage and played it again. There was no misunderstanding. No innocent explanation. The president of the HOA was trespassing on private property in the middle of the night. The next morning, Rachel confronted her. She waited until neighbors were outside, until dog walkers were passing through, until there were witnesses. Denise was standing beside a flower bed, pretending to inspect landscaping. Rachel walked straight up to her. "Stay away from our property." Denise turned. "What property?" "Our property. The one you've been sneaking onto after midnight." For a moment, Denise looked genuinely surprised. Not guilty. Surprised. Like the possibility of being caught had never occurred to her. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "I'm conducting community inspections." Rachel folded her arms. Community inspections don't happen at 1 in the morning. Denise stepped closer. Close enough to make the conversation uncomfortable. Close enough to make the message clear. They happen whenever I decide they happen. That sentence sat in my head for days. Because it wasn't really about inspections. It wasn't about rules. It was about authority. Or at least the version of authority Denise imagined she possessed. A few days later, things got worse. Rachel started documenting everything. Every email, every phone call, every interaction, every vehicle that slowed down in front of the house. At first, she felt ridiculous doing it, like one of those conspiracy theorists with red string on a bulletin board. But then the incidents started piling up. First, one evening, she discovered somebody had opened the gate to our backyard. Nothing stolen, just opened. A week later, packages disappeared from the porch. Then another violation notice arrived, claiming excessive government surveillance equipment was visible from neighboring properties. The surveillance equipment turned out to be a security camera, the same type half the neighborhood used. Rachel started asking questions, quietly, carefully, and what she learned was interesting. People were afraid of Denise. Not physically, socially, financially, emotionally. An elderly widower down the street admitted he'd paid thousands of dollars in HOA fines over the years because fighting them felt impossible. A military spouse revealed she'd received nearly 40 violation notices during her husband's deployment. Another resident told Rachel he stopped attending HOA meetings because Denise publicly humiliated anyone who disagreed with her. The stories kept coming. Different details. Same pattern. Control. Fear. Compliance. Then Rachel found something unexpected. My grandmother's old filing cabinet. The thing weighed about as much as a pickup truck. Inside were decades of neighborhood records, meeting notes, old newsletters, Original HOA documents. Most people would have thrown them away years ago. My grandmother kept everything. And for the first time in my life, that habit became incredibly useful. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Rachel started digging through the files. Hours passed. Then she called me. Not scared, not angry, excited. "Ethan," she said, "I found it." Found what? The original bylaws. Turns out the rules Denise kept citing didn't exist. At least not in the original documents. In fact, the exact opposite existed. There was an entire section specifically protecting military personnel, federal employees, and government vehicles from discriminatory enforcement. The language was crystal clear. No ambiguity, no loopholes, no room for interpretation. Denise had either ignored the rules or rewritten them, and suddenly everything made sense. The targeting, the pressure, the confidence. She wasn't enforcing regulations. She was inventing them. The deeper Rachel dug, the uglier things became. Several amendment records appeared incomplete. Meeting minutes were missing. Voting records didn't match. Entire pages had vanished. Someone had been manipulating documents for years, maybe longer. Meanwhile, Denise continued escalating. One afternoon, Rachel came home from the grocery store and found a white security SUV parked across the street. Not police, not city security. Private contractors hired by the HOA. Two men sat inside watching the house. They didn't hide it, didn't pretend otherwise. They just sat there, observing. Rachel walked up to the driver's window. The guard lowered the glass halfway. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man shrugged. "Just doing my job." "What job?" "Community monitoring." Rachel laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Yet somehow that answer felt completely normal in Cedar Ridge now. Community monitoring. As if residents were inmates and Denise was the warden. That same week, Rachel's car was vandalized. All four tires slashed. Passenger mirror destroyed. Red paint splattered across the windshield. No witnesses. No suspects. No evidence. The sheriff's office took a report and moved on. Rachel called me afterward. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, she sounded defeated. Not scared. Tired. The kind of tired that settles deep inside your bones. The kind that comes from fighting something every day and realizing it never fights fair. I remember sitting alone after that phone call ended, staring at a wall, thinking about how helpless distance can make you feel. I could deal with armed threats. I could handle dangerous assignments. I knew exactly how to respond when problems followed rules. But this was different. This was one woman slowly poisoning an entire community while hiding behind paperwork. Then came the video that changed everything. 2 nights later, my SUV's security system activated at 1:43 a.m. Motion detected. Camera recording. Rachel reviewed the footage the following morning. Then she called me immediately. When I answered, she didn't speak. She simply sent the file. I opened it and felt every muscle in my body go rigid. Because Denise wasn't just trespassing anymore. She wasn't walking around the vehicle. She wasn't peeking through windows. This time she was trying to get inside, trying door handles, photographing equipment, speaking quietly to someone standing just outside the camera's view. And for the first time since this started, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Denise wasn't obsessed with enforcing rules. She was obsessed with that vehicle. And whatever she thought she was going to find inside it, she was getting desperate enough to take serious risks. The problem for Denise was that she had no idea she was about to attract attention from people far outside the HOA. People who didn't care about neighborhood politics. People who definitely didn't care about her authority. And once those people started paying attention, everything was going to change. The funny thing about arrogance is that it usually destroys itself. Most people think powerful people fall because somebody smarter beats them. Sometimes that's true, but more often they fall because eventually they convince themselves they're untouchable. And once somebody believes that, they stop being careful. That's exactly what happened to Denise Holloway. After I forwarded the footage to my agency's legal department, things started moving quietly behind the scenes. Very quietly. Nobody kicked down doors. Nobody made dramatic announcements. Nobody showed up with flashing lights. Instead, questions started getting asked. Reports started getting reviewed. Records started getting collected. And while all of that was happening, Denise kept pushing harder. Because as far as she knew, she was winning. She filed complaints with local authorities claiming our SUV contained dangerous equipment. She contacted the fire department, insisting it was a public hazard. She submitted reports alleging Rachel was creating disturbances within the community. At one point, she even tried convincing animal control that we own an aggressive dog. We didn't own a dog. Never had. Every complaint was dismissed. But every complaint also created paperwork. And every piece of paperwork added another brick to a wall Denise couldn't see being built around her. Then came the morning everything finally exploded. It was a Tuesday, 6:12 a.m., the same time Rachel's call had woken me up months earlier. Only this time her voice wasn't calm. She was shouting, "Ethan, she's here." I sat straight up in bed. What happened? She's trying to take it. The video feed bounced wildly as Rachel ran outside. Then the image stabilized. And there she was, Denise. Pink bathrobe, slippers, hair sticking out in every direction, bolt cutters in her hands, a tow truck idling behind her. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I was dreaming. Because no sane person would do this. Not after months of warnings. Not after multiple reports. Not after being caught on camera repeatedly. But Denise wasn't acting rationally anymore. She was acting like somebody whose authority had become an addiction. I watched her swing the bolt cutters. Metal snapped. The security chain dropped. One of the tow truck operators stepped forward. Even through the phone speaker, I could hear uncertainty in his voice. "Ma'am, are you sure about this?" Denise pointed at the SUV. "Remove it." The driver hesitated. "I was told this was abandoned property." "It is. Someone lives here. It violates HOA regulations." The driver looked uncomfortable. Then he noticed Rachel filming. Then he noticed neighbors coming outside. Then he noticed the federal registration markings. His face changed immediately. "Mom, I don't think we're authorized to touch that." Denise exploded. Not angry. Furious. The kind of fury that comes from hearing the word no for the first time in years. "I am the authority," she screamed. Half the neighborhood heard it. Maybe the entire neighborhood. People started appearing on porches. Garage doors opened. Phones came out. And somehow Denise still didn't realize she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Because when the driver refused to move the SUV, she doubled down. She ordered maintenance workers to change the electronic gate locks at the entrance to Cedar Ridge. Her logic was simple. If nobody could access the neighborhood, nobody could remove the vehicle. What Denise didn't understand was that the moment she intentionally restricted access involving federal property, she crossed into territory far beyond HOA politics. And that's when everything began moving very fast. By noon, the story had spread across town. By evening, local reporters were calling. By the next morning, investigators were asking questions. The following weeks felt surreal. Financial records surfaced. Missing HOA funds surfaced. Private communications surfaced. Witnesses surfaced. And once people realized Denise was vulnerable, years of silence started breaking. Residents came forward one after another. Some carried folders. Some carried photographs. Some carried stories they'd been holding on to for years. The picture that emerged wasn't flattering. Denise hadn't simply abused authority. She had built an entire system around it. Fees, selective enforcement, intimidation, manipulation, pressure campaigns. And according to investigators, thousands of dollars had disappeared from HOA accounts during her leadership. The final public meeting took place nearly 6 months later. I had finally returned home. The community center was packed. Standing room only. Residents filled every chair. Reporters lined the walls. The atmosphere felt less like an HOA meeting and more like a courtroom. Rachel spoke first. She wasn't nervous anymore. Months earlier she would have been. Now she looked calm, steady, stronger than I'd ever seen her. She talked about transparency, fairness, accountability. She talked about neighbors being treated like neighbors instead of problems to manage. And for the first time in years, people applauded inside that building. Then investigators presented their findings. Emails, financial records, security footage, witness testimony. Piece by piece, the image Denise had spent years creating fell apart. By the end, there wasn't much left. Just a frightened woman sitting quietly in the front row. A woman who suddenly looked much smaller than she had before. When law enforcement finally approached her, the room became completely silent. No cheating, no celebration, no dramatic speeches, just silence. The officer informed her she was being taken into custody pending multiple charges related to fraud, harassment, obstruction, and financial misconduct. Denise looked around the room, maybe searching for support, maybe searching for someone to tell her this wasn't real. Nobody did, because for years she'd demanded loyalty, but she'd never earned trust. And those are very different things. As she was escorted toward the exit, she stopped briefly, turned toward the crowd, and said something I'll never forget. I was trying to protect this community. Nobody answered, because maybe she believed it. Maybe somewhere along the way, she convinced herself every action had been justified. Maybe power had distorted her perspective so completely she could no longer see the damage she caused. Or maybe she was simply lying until the very end. Honestly, I still don't know. Why do know is this? Cedar Ridge changed after that. The HOA was restructured. Financial transparency became mandatory. Resident oversight increased. And for the first time in years, people actually started talking to one another again. Not through violation notices, not through threats, through conversations. Rachel eventually joined the new board, not because she wanted power, because she wanted to make sure nobody else experienced what she did. As for me, I kept the house. The same creaky floors, the same porch, the same faint smell of cinnamon that somehow never disappears. Sometimes I sit outside in the evening and watch kids ride bicycles past the place where neighbors once avoided eye contact. And every now and then I find myself wondering about Denise. Not because I miss her, definitely not because of that, but because her story raises a question I still can't answer. Was she a villain from the beginning? Or was she an ordinary person who slowly convinced herself that control and leadership were the same thing? Because there is a difference. A very important difference. And when communities forget it, bad things tend to happen. So now I'm curious what you think. Was Denise simply corrupt? Did power change her? Or do organizations like HOAs sometimes create the perfect environment for people like that to thrive? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with someone who confused authority with ownership, I'd genuinely like to hear your story. Because sometimes the most interesting part isn't what happened. It's why it happened in the first place.